Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Cork Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I am so excited for today's episode. We are continuing on in the little mini series on France and French wine, inspired by my trip to France. And this episode is especially special, I guess you could say, because this is my first episode that I'm recording after my trip. So those podcasts, the interview that you heard with Katie just before this, I actually recorded that before I left. And now I've had my experience in France and I can't wait to share all of it with you. So we are going to be starting with a little overview of the trip to France. So I'm going to cover how I planned this trip. I did most of the planning. You could probably say like 95% of the planning for this trip. And it was a big one. So I thought I'd share how I did that and how I kind of simplified it and made it a little easier for myself. Also going to cover kind of where we went so you have an idea of what to expect on the upcoming episodes and what we're going to focus on. I'm going to give you kind of some general tips. I kind of just jotted these down as my husband and I were traveling throughout France and thought these would be helpful for you if you are planning a trip. And then just some fun facts to know, even if you're not planning a trip. And then finally, the next 3 solo episodes are going to be focused on the different wine regions that we visited, but I didn't want to leave out Paris. I mean, Paris is not necessarily a wine region, but they have great wine there, obviously, biggest city in France. So I thought at the end of this episode, I will highlight 2 of my favorite spots that we visited and the wines we drank, so you can add them to your bucket list if you ever visit the city. So let's start things off. We're going to just start with a little summary of the trip, kind of the motivation, where we decided to go, all of that good stuff. So starting off, the motivation for France. I mean, obviously, as a wine lover, I knew I had to visit France at some point. Like, one of my favorite wines and one of the wines I first fell in love with was a white Burgundy. This is Chardonnay from the Burgundy region of France. And I knew after trying that like it would just be heaven to get to visit this region and get to try these wines. And so I knew I always wanted to do it. One of my favorite wine shops here in Seattle was a primarily French wine. They did a few other things, but their thing was French wine. And he always took a trip every year to France. And whenever you'd go in to taste, he'd pull out his little picture books of all of the different places that he'd visited and the wineries. And I had mentioned that this would be fun to go to. He's like, oh, well, let me know if you go at the same time I go, we can try to like go together to some of the wineries. I'm like, hot damn, that sounds amazing. Unfortunately, that never happened. We were going to try to do that, my husband and I, before the pandemic. I think we had thought about going to France sometime in 2020. And of course, I'm sure many of you know this experience that clearly did not happen. So it kind of just got pushed down on our list of to-dos. When it was safe to travel again, we started visiting more local, closer wine regions. So we went to California, we went to Sonoma and Napa and Santa Barbara. I visited Walla Walla a couple times, of course. And I knew I always wanted to do this, but like, it's just a big deal to like travel to another country so far away. And I don't love flying, I will admit. So this was definitely something holding me back a bit. But last year, I think it was for my birthday, my mom and my dad got me this wonderful basket full of French goodies. And they're like, we know you want to go to France. This is your push. So it had, a couple wine books. It had a fun wine themed wine glass. It had just all these fun things. And I was like, you're right. This is the exact, not quite guilt trip, but the thing that I need that will push me to do this. And so we decided then we were going to go the next year, and we just needed to figure out when. We decided on harvest time. I will admit there are some pros and cons to that. The pros is that it's absolutely beautiful. And if you visit just after harvest, you can often still see some grapes on the vine that they did not pick. And we actually got to taste some of these, which was really cool. But the con is that everyone is busy during harvest. So we didn't get to taste at a lot of spots because the winemakers were all very, very busy. So like I said, we decided on harvest time, end of September. This was also when it wasn't going to be too hot, but it wasn't going to be freezing cold. And we were hoping for some sunshine. We definitely did get some sun, but we ran into some rain as well. So, it could go either way. So we chose our time, and then it was like, all right, you want to go to France? Where are you going in France? Because if you've listened to my French 101 class, I think I did part 1 and part 2, there are lots of wine regions in France, and you definitely cannot visit them all in the 10 days that we were going to be in France. So we had to narrow it down, and oh my God, it was so hard to narrow it down. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. But here's what we came up with. We were like, well, we'll fly into Paris. Obviously, easiest city to fly into. Then we actually have a friend who's living in Nantes, which is in Western France in the Loire Valley. So we're like, we obviously have to add that to the trip. And then we are trying to decide one more region. It's do we head south to Provence, Côtes d'Aron? I feel like that would be a really cool area to be in. But of course, first love, white Burgundy. We couldn't not go to Burgundy. So Burgundy was the other region. And then the benefit of that is there's this little tiny region called Jura, which is about an hour's drive from Burgundy. And we're like, we will do a day trip there. So we narrowed it down to our choices. I had such a hard time saying no to other regions that were really close by, like Alsace up north and Champagne. Of course, you could do a day trip from Paris there, but we didn't want to feel like we were traveling the entire time. So we decided on we're going to fly into Paris. We will then take a train to Nantes. We will fly from Nantes to Lyon because there's not a big enough airport in Burgundy. So Lyon is actually in Beaujolais, which is just south of Burgundy. So we flew in there, got a rental car because trust me, you're going to want a rental car in Burgundy. There isn't as much public transportation. Got a rental car in Lyon, drove up to Beaune, which is in the Côte d'Or of Burgundy. Don't worry if none of these things mean anything to you. I am going to deep dive into each of these wine regions in further episodes. So rental car to Beaune, that is where we stayed. That was kind of our home base in Burgundy. Day trip over to Jura. So we just drove over to Arbois in the Jura region and then obviously drove back to Burgundy and then finally drove up to Dijon, got on a train back to Paris for a day and flew back. So that was our trip. It was wild. We did it all in 10 days. It was crazy, but it was so much fun. So talking about any tips for planning. So I am a spreadsheet girly. I love creating spreadsheets. I just think it's super helpful to jot everything down. So once we had decided where we wanted to go, the first step that I did was, well, most importantly, we need to have lodging. We need to know where we are staying and we need to know how we're going to get to each place. And I wanted to try to take trains as much as possible because it's so much easier than getting on a plane. It's just so convenient. It's so much less of a hassle. So focus on trying to do trains. We ended up doing the flight from Nantes to Lyon just because it would have been like a 6-hour train ride during the day and we didn't want it to take up one of our days. But otherwise, stuck to train. So figured that out, got that mapped out on a spreadsheet. And for your pleasure, if you enjoy spreadsheets, I will link my spreadsheet that I used just because, obviously we're not there anymore. So I'm not worried about any weirdos showing up. Then again, if you're listening to this, I don't think you're a weirdo. I think you're a fun wine weirdo like me, but that's a good thing. But yeah, we've already done this trip, so I don't mind sharing it all with you. You will see just how crazy I am, but also maybe how organized maybe you and I are two peas in a pod. But yeah, I will share the spreadsheet in case you're curious. But we figured out where we were going to go. So we booked all of our hotels, and then we figured out how we were going to get to those places. So we booked the flights and the train tickets. After that, it was about booking the activities that were the most important. And I bet you can guess what was the most important. That was tastings. You do need to book tasting reservations for most wineries. And in a lot of spots, I'd even recommend taking it a step further and booking a tour. So in each of the wine regions, there are lots of different tour experiences. A couple places you could just do a Google search for wine tours in and then your place that you're going to. So for us, it was like wine tasting tours in Beaune or in Burgundy. You can also look on Airbnb. So we booked one through Airbnb and one through Google through a search that we found there. And so both of those were in Burgundy. And I highly recommend, I will, like I said, do a full episode on Burgundy. I'll let you know more about those tasting experiences. But yes, definitely book a tour. A lot of these wineries in France don't need to have tastings because they have ways to sell their wine already. And then they also don't necessarily work regular hours, or the winery is often, there's only like 3 workers. There's like the winemaker, the manager, and somebody maybe working in the tasting room or doing the books or something like that. They don't always have like a tasting room manager whose only job is to take care of the tasting room. So you're going to want to book reservations wherever you go. Also note, not a lot of them are great at responding at emails. This is something I learned from my friend. Apparently, France is still a little behind in the world of communication. So if you don't get a response right away, don't be afraid to text them or to email them. Again, if you speak French, highly recommend calling. That is apparently the way everybody does things, but I don't speak French, so that never would have gone well for me. So we booked all of our tasting reservations, both in Jura and in Burgundy. And then my friend booked the one in Nantes or near Nantes. So we didn't have to worry about that. But again, if you don't have somebody doing that, book your tasting reservations in advance. Trust me, it just works better that way. We also knew that we wanted to do a food tour. If you're ever in a big city, somewhere new, look for a food tour. Airbnb is a great place. Otherwise, I had found one called Secret Food Tour, and it was from honestly following other influencers on Instagram. This one came from Lexi's Wine List, and yeah, that's how we booked our food tour in Paris. But again, highly recommend, and don't do it on your last day in the city because they are going to give you so many great recommendations that you are going to want to like check out all those places or even ask for recommendations. Like I had asked them at the end of our experience, like, hey, we really want to do a restaurant with a beautiful view of the Eiffel Tower at the end of the day. Do you have any recommendations? And she's like, oh, absolutely. Here, let me just send you this list that all of the tour guides put together with all of the different recommendations. And so again, you will get great tips. You will be so mad if you go on the last day because you'll be like, no, I need to leave tomorrow. So don't do that. Okay. I have made that mistake. Book your food tour early so then you know where to go later on. Now, speaking of reservations, the other thing is we made dinner reservations for a little over half the nights. We wanted to leave room for recommendations from locals, like we mentioned. But again, here, you're going to want reservations. A couple times we tried to just get dinner without our reservations, and most of the spots were booked. A lot of these restaurants are small. They don't have a lot of tables, and they really only do 2 services, one at 7 and one at 9 or around 8:30. And so generally do recommend looking for dinner spots that you'd want to go to. Again, look for those local influencers or influencers that do things that you like. So in my case, they were wine people. I kind of followed them. If they did a trip to Paris, I kind of kept an eye on when they would share dinner spots that they'd recommend. Google searches do help a lot here. Read the Yelp reviews, kind of figure out the ambiance and what you're going for. And again, you can leave some of the nights open to, like we did, for room for recommendations. So we did wait, got recommendations, and then made reservations while we were there. Finally, the last thing that we did, we just made a list of other things that we wanted to do, but could play it more by ear. I have learned that you should not schedule every hour of the day. Now, if you look at the spreadsheet, it's going to look like I kind of did that. But that was just because we created that spreadsheet as we went. So when my husband thought of something or when we decided to add something to the schedule, we would add it in. But otherwise, we just kind of made a list of things like this could be cool, this would be fun if we're up for it, but maybe we'll just want to take a nap. And so we did that. And finally, this is my last little thing. This is not something I did as part of my early planning, and I should have. One of the things I wish I would have done earlier is get in contact with a wine importer to help us get our wine home. We used Côte d'Or Imports. They are wonderful. Highly recommend if you are going to France and want to ship some wine home. But I did not get a hold of them until just before getting on the plane to France. And that was not a good idea. They did wonderfully, but things would have worked so much better if I just would have given myself a little more time, because the thing is, they will reach out to the wineries for you and give them a heads up, tell them how it works. And so then they're kind of in contact. The problem is I didn't get a hold of them until later, so they didn't get a chance to talk to one of the wineries that we visited earlier. And so we weren't able to purchase the wine because they weren't aware of how it worked. Had I gotten a hold of the importer earlier and they would have been able to call the winery earlier, things could have been different. But let's be real. Did I really need more wine? Probably not. Okay, that is planning of the trip. If you have more questions about planning, feel free to reach out, DM me. I also offer itinerary building, whether you are going somewhere far away or staying here, close to the US. I am more than happy to build an itinerary for you. This is a new service that I offer on my website. Just go to corkandfizz.com and you will find that. And then I also host day trips here in the Seattle area. And I have a couple openings throughout the year for a longer multi-day private retreat if that's something that interests you and you don't want to do all of this crazy work to try to put a trip together. All right, as promised at the end of this little podcast episode, I wanted to share just some general tips for visiting France and then share my 2 favorite spots that I visited when it came to wine. This podcast is sponsored by Repour Wine Savers. Listen, I love wine, but that doesn't mean I want to drink a full bottle every night. You see, it's always a risk opening a bottle knowing I'll only have a glass or 2. But now I don't worry about that at all because I have Repour. These little contraptions will keep your open bottles of wine good for up to 3 months by removing oxygen from the bottle using fancy chemistry. And they're so easy to use. I simply open a bottle of wine, cork or screw cap, just like normal, and enjoy my glass or 2. Then, when I'm ready to call it a night, I rip the foil off my Repour Wine Saver and place it in the bottle in place of the cork or screw cap, and then stick the bottle in the fridge. Simple as that. Then, whenever I grab another glass from that bottle in the future, I just make sure to put the Repour back on as soon as I'm done pouring. It's that easy. Want to give Repour a try? Head to repour.com, repour.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ for 10% off your order. That's Repour, repour.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ. No spaces in that, and the "and" is spelled out, so it's CORKANDFIZZ. Once you have Repour, you'll never have to worry about opening a bottle of wine just for one glass. I mean, heck, now you can try 2 or more wines at the same time and have your own at-home wine tasting. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. So, general tips. We're going to go kind of lightning round here. So, first one we already talked about, make dinner reservations and maybe even make lunch reservations, especially if you don't speak French. This was the easiest way to kind of convey that we wanted to eat there. And just like so much easier. It was as simple as bonjour, and they'd ask, do you have reservations? And we'd say, oui. And Bowman, that's our last name. And it was as simple as that. So it worked out really well. You don't have to make lunch reservations. A lot of places you can just walk up to. But again, this did make it a little easier with the language barrier. Dinner reservations, you most definitely should make. The metro is great in Paris. This is the underground train. It is so expansive and so easy to use. You just need to look up on Google Maps how to get somewhere. It'll tell you which lines to get on, where to get on them, and then you just follow all of the signs. Like there's a whole underground world underneath Paris with the metro. One recommendation here, when you get a ticket, if you get just like a regular cardboard ticket like we got, do not put it near your phone. That will demagnetize the ticket and you will not be able to use it. Ask me how I know that. Next tip, trains are your friend. We thought the trains were so convenient. Planes are nice too, and they're pretty cheap in Europe when you're hopping between different cities or different countries. But the trains are so much more convenient, and it's so pretty to get to see the countryside as you go and just way more comfortable. So if you can, take a train. I'd highly recommend it. Okay, big cities, you can rely on walking and public transportation. Outside of the big cities, so the big cities for us were Paris and Nantes. Outside of the big cities, like when we were in Burgundy, consider renting a car. You'll be able to see so much more and be able to visit so many more wineries. And even just like that experience of driving in the vineyards or around the vineyards is really, really cool. So definitely look into it. You do need to, if you rent a car, we rented a car just through like Expedia, but then you will need to get an international driving license. I think you can get it online. I think we got it within like 10 minutes. And you just have to, it's just like a printed sheet of paper, almost like the translated version of your license. You do have to pay for it. And nobody ever asked us for it, but it was good to have just in case. As I mentioned before, the time you go has a major impact. Harvest, we decided to go in September. And so harvest did make it a little harder. We wanted to kind of be there. I was hoping to time it when there'd be some grapes still on the vine. Unfortunately, all the places we went to picked pretty early, so there weren't many grapes still on the vine, but the vineyard still looked really, really pretty, I will admit. And there were some leftover grapes that we got to taste, which is kind of cool. But if I were to go again, I might choose to go a little later, like say in October. The winemakers aren't quite as enthralled in the middle of the harvest season. It's also really pretty in the Burgundy area. It's called Côte d'Or. That means like the hills of gold, or even like Gold Coast, because the leaves all turn this yellow orange and it's absolutely beautiful. Another good time to go, I think, is earlier, like in May. Like you don't want to go in the summer, too hot. But in April, May, you're not going to see the vineyards like as beautiful with their leaves, but it's going to be a great time to talk to winemakers and actually get to do a lot of tastings. Okay, what else do I have here? Keep in mind, most places in France have rest periods, so there's not a lot open between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Lots of things are closed on Sundays, even grocery stores, so think ahead. Coffee shops don't open until at least 7 a.m. and that's early, so probably closer to 8 a.m. So if you are an early person or need your caffeine, maybe bring something with you. One thing that was surprising is a lot of spots expected us to pay with card, and I was expecting to use cash. I remember when I studied abroad in Spain back in, when was this? 2016? It was weird to use a card. Everybody preferred that you used cash. Versus here, everybody was using your card. So you could get by without having to, exchange a lot of euros. We had done that earlier here in the US at our local bank. So you could get by. Just keep in mind the foreign transaction fees. And if those are going to add up, make sure your credit card is one that has low foreign transaction fees or none. And finally, having to do with the credit cards, a lot of restaurants require credit cards to reserve. And sometimes they don't like our American credit cards. So sometimes we just had to try on a different day. And one time we had to just give up and use our French friend's card. Thanks, Alex. So I'm sorry. I don't have a great solution to that other than like find a French friend who will let you use their card. Okay. All right. We are coming to the end of this, and I am not going to forget to include my 2 Paris favorite. So I don't have a dedicated episode to Paris during this little French mini series, not because I didn't enjoy myself, but to be fair, this is a wine podcast, so I wanted to focus more on the wine regions. That said, there are some great places to go in Paris for delicious wine. Obviously, this is just the 2 that I went to. I think there's just a never-ending list, so don't think that this is it. But I wanted to highlight 2 of my favorites. So the first night, we went out to eat at a restaurant called The Reminette. It's Reminет. And first of all, amazing food. And I want to tell you what we ate because when I tell you the wine, I want you to realize how crazy it is that this wine paired with every item that we ate. It was wild. So for me, I did the salmon tartare and the roasted cod. So both a raw fish and then a cooked white fish. And then my husband did burrata with tomatoes, watermelon, and pesto, along with a beef satay with beetroot. And I'm also specifying the beetroot because that's hard to pair wine with. And both him and I do not usually like beets, and it was so good on this dish. So I had to eat our words a little bit when we're like, oh, maybe we should get it without the beetroot. That's not a thing in France. You can't do that. So we ate it, and it was delicious anyway. Now, the wine menu was basically like 95% French, but the prices on it were what blew my mind. You could get a bottle of wine for like 25 euros, which the euro to US dollar exchange rate is pretty close to 1 to 1. I think it's like 1.1 something dollars to 1 euro. So about $25. And then of course it went upwards to 100 euro plus when you got into like the high end Bordeaux and Burgundy and whatnot. We went for a bottle of Condrieu. This is spelled Condrieu. This is from Domaine Francois Viard. And this is a Viognier. So we specifically chose a wine from a region that we wouldn't be visiting, kind of an opportunity to really like have a good breadth of wines that we were tasting. And oh, it was stupid good. I love Condrieu. Anytime I get a chance to try this wine, it is just like nectar without being sweet. I don't know how to describe it, but it just has this really nice full body to it while being bright and refreshing. And like I said, it paired with everything that we ate. So highly recommend if you're out to eat. Condrieu is a great one. And go check out this restaurant if you are in Paris, the Reminette. Now, the second night, we were going to go to a cocktail bar, but there was a huge line out the door. So we checked the map and we found a wine bar right around the corner. It's called Monsieur Henry. And this is actually a natural wine bar. I shared all about this on social media. I'm thinking I might make like a little like saved stories, little bubble, that show up on your profile of all of like our French adventures. So if you're listening to this far into the future, you can still find that. So hopefully that'll be there by the time you check my Instagram. It's at Cork and Fizz on Instagram, and you should be able to find this. But anyway, Monsieur Henry. The bartender didn't speak much English, and you already know that my husband and I don't speak much French. And there was no menu. He just asked us what we liked, what we wanted. Luckily, there was a British woman there who had moved to France, so she spoke English and French, and she helped translate a little bit for us. But even then, honestly, we all spoke the language of wine, so we figured it out just fine. But just to give you an idea, we meant to have 1 drink each, my husband and I, and we left after 4 drinks apiece at this spot. The last one was a glass of sparkling that was poured by the bartender as a parting gift, and simply because he was drinking it and enjoying it. So we didn't pay or ask for that one, but we thoroughly enjoyed it, that's for sure. In terms of the wines that we enjoyed, we had a Chenin Blanc from the Languedoc, a Macabeo, or what's called Macabeo, which is actually typically a grape used in Spanish cava, but this was made in France. It was a vin de France, just meaning that no specific designation. I had a Southern Rhone orange wine that was so insanely deep in color. It was made from Roussanne and Marsanne. And then we actually had a red Burgundy that was made in a natural wine style. And so again, natural wine doesn't mean that it has to be funky and sparkling and all these things. It just means that they follow certain principles when they make the wine. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this little overview of my trip. And if you're planning a trip to France anytime soon, or really any other wine region, I hope you found my planning tips helpful. The next few episodes will be a combo of talking about my experience in each wine region while also giving kind of a brief overview of that region, for educational purposes. If you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy this podcast, please share it with them. You can find your favorite episode, maybe it's this one, and send it their way. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new episodes every Wednesday. Now, in next week's episode, we'll be doing a deep dive into the wine region known as Muscadet in Western France. I only did one tasting here technically, but it was incredible and I took lots and lots of notes to share with you. Thanks again for listening, and if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in exploring new wines and joining an incredible community of wine lovers, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. Head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to come check out a tasting for free. Cheers!